In this video, I want to talk a bit about John Rawls and his views about justice. Now, Rawls is one of the most influential political thinkers of the last century. So his view is it's a pretty big deal. We might just put it that way. He articulates this view in a book called A Theory of Justice. Justice is Fairness. He's got a couple other pretty influential books as well. But we're going to take a look at this particular work and see what Rawls has to say there about what justice is. All right. So in this book, A Theory of Justice, Rawls tries to give us an account of what justice is. And he thinks that in order to identify what policies are just, we need to know what policies people would agree to if they didn't know their particular position in society. So for Rawls, justice is something like fairness, and fairness is something that we could figure out if we weren't self-interested. We sort of need to take our self-interest, or at least we can't sort of stump for things that are best for us. So to figure out what people in this, what people would agree to if they didn't know their position in society, he sort of has us do this thought experiment where we're supposed to imagine ourselves in what he calls the original position of equality behind the veil of ignorance. So the original position of equality is sort of one where we're all equal, and behind the veil of ignorance, what that does is it sort of shields us from knowing particular facts about ourselves or our situation. So in this position, we know basic facts about human psychology. We know how humans act. We know what they do. We understand them, how they operate. We also know that we have a conception of the good. Like we know that we're going to maybe like sports or like music. We're going to be religious, or we're going to be an atheist. Maybe we'll be, I don't know, an excellent professor, or we know that we could be a janitor. The thing is, we don't really know which of those things we're going to be, and we don't know what we're going to enjoy. We don't know if we'll like, football or blues music or classical music. Maybe we'll like playing tiddlywinks. Who knows? We're not quite sure. So just to sort of help you see what's going on here, I've put some people on the world, and the thought is each of those people like sort of finds themselves in a particular position. They're living in a certain place. Maybe they're wealthy, maybe they're poor, maybe they're a man, maybe they're a woman, maybe they're black, maybe they're white, maybe they're brown. We don't know sort of well, each of them sort of knows what they are, right? But so for Rawls, what we need to do is we need to like, if we know all these things about ourselves, then we're gonna like argue for in self-interested sorts of ways. And so the real way to figure out what's fair is for us to kind of like not know anything about ourselves. So Rawls sorts of imagine us like sort of going off, into a separate place, and then there's sort of like a veil of ignorance, right, draped over us. So we're sort of behind the veil, and we don't know who we are in society, but we sort of know that people are out there, right? So we've got the people behind the veil, and they're sort of like looking out in a way at people operating society. And what the people behind the veil need to do is they need to figure out sort of what rules would they choose if they don't know which of those people they're going to be, right? So they don't know whether they're the sort of like bluish character, or the dark green character, or the yellowish brownish character. They're not sort of sure who they're going to be, and so when they're picking principles, they can't be biased, right? Because they don't know. It's not in their interest to be biased, right? If they sort of are biased towards one person, they might turn out to be a different one, and so that policy is going to backfire on them. So they sort of they can be fair, and whatever principles they would agree to, those are the ones that we should choose. Those are the ones that are just. So what would we choose from behind this veil? Rawls assumes, rightly I think, that we would prefer more what he calls primary social goods than fewer. So what are primary social goods? things like rights and liberties, powers and opportunities, income and wealth, and self-respect. So we want like the right to move around and do various things. We want to be free. We want to have the ability to, apply for jobs and go to different places. We want as much income and money as possible, and we want respect too. Income and wealth are good, but if nobody respects us, that's bad too. So those are the sorts of things that we would want behind the veil. Now, given that assumption, he thinks we're going to accept two principles of justice. The first one says that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with similar liberty for others. Basically, the thought here is like we want to like give people as much freedom as possible. We want to let them make as many choices as they can without infringing on others' freedoms. So we're not going to allow people to sort of go around punching anything that they want because that's going to involve people punching each other, and then those people can't punch because they're in the hospital or something like that. So the thought is that we've got to we want to give people as many rights, as many liberties, as much room to sort of move around as they can without infringing on one another's space. The second principle that he thinks we'll accept is this one. So social and economic inequalities, any sort of inequalities between people, have to be arranged so that they are both reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B, they have to be attached to positions and offices that are open to everyone. So the advantages have to sort of attach to roles, maybe jobs, right, that are open to everyone. Anyone can become a janitor, anyone can become a professor or a doctor, something like that, right? We can't say only men can become doctors and only and women are the only people who can become psychologists or something like that. The positions need to be open to everyone, and the inequalities, whenever there's an inequality, it's got to be to everybody's advantage. So fleshing that idea out a bit more, he thinks that we're going to choose in accordance with what he calls a maximin rule, which says that a society is better off than another one if and only if its least well-off members are better off than the least well-off members in the other society. So Rawls's thought here is like, when we're picking which society we would want to join, or when we're sort of figuring out what the basic rules of society are going to be, we're going to prefer societies where the people who are the least well-off are as well-off as possible, right? That's the maximizing. The minimum, we want to take the people who are the least well-off, the minimum, and we want to maximize their situation. So that's the maximin rule. And then using the maximin rule, Rawls thinks that we're going to accept what he calls the difference principle. And the difference principle says that inequality in a society is justified only if it benefits the least well-off members of society. So if doctors are really rich, or we're making them, giving them a lot of money, it's gotta be because giving doctors a lot of money is going to benefit everyone else. And in fact, that kind of makes sense, right? So if doctors and janitors are paid the same, and being a doctor takes like a lot of work, and being a janitor is a bit easier, then it seems like people are just going to be janitors and we're not going to have any doctors. So Rawls might think we can pay doctors more. That's going to incentivize people to become doctors. And when people are doctors, that's good for society because they can sort of use their skills to help everybody be healthier than they would be otherwise. So Rawls thinks that like some inequality is justified, but it's only justified in virtue of the fact that the inequality is good for people who are the least well off. So at the end of the day, if I were to like sort of define Rawls's theory, I'd put it like this. A policy is just if and only if people in the original position behind the veil of ignorance would consent to it. So policy is just, just in the justice sense, right? If and only if people behind that veil of ignorance are going to consent to it. Now, what are those people going to consent to? They're going to consent to policies if and only if the policy is consistent with the difference principle and the difference principle requires that the primary social goods are distributed in ways that benefit the least well-off members of society. So if we those two things are true, then we might say a policy is just if and only if it distributes the primary social goods in ways that benefit the least well-off. All right, so that's the theory. Now we want to try and apply it, or see how it would apply to some scenarios. Now, the scenarios I'm going to use are very speculative, very theoretical, but I think that doing this will be good enough to help us apply it to some real-life situations. Okay, so in this little chart, what I'm doing is I'm sort of imagining different worlds and the people in those worlds and the amount of primary social goods that those people have. So in this world, we've got 3 people. Right? It could be 1,000,000, right? We don't want to make a table with 1,000,000 people. Not going to be able to read it. It's going to be hard. But the sort of simplified version will be good enough to get a sense. So in world 1, person 1 has -7 primary social goods, person 2 has 8, and person 3 has 12. And if we add all those up, there are 13 primary social goods distributed. We've got some positive, we've got some negative. World 2, person 1 has -8, person 2 has 7, person 3 has 14 primary social goods. Again, if we total those up, we again get 13. And then world 3, person 1 has 5, person 2 has 6, person 3 has 8, for a total of 19. Now, what we want to do for Rawls, if we're figuring out which world do we want, we sort of look at the policies in each of these worlds, and we say well, which policies do I want to adopt? And the thought is, I want to adopt the policies that lead to world 3. Why? Because the person who's the least well off in world 3 is this person right here, the person with 5. The person that's least well off in world 2 has -8. Person here has -7. The person who's the least well off in world 3 is better off than the least well off person in these other worlds. So for Rawls, he's going to pick the policies to go along with world 3 because that's producing the best result. It's maximizing the minimum. That's the one Rawls is picking. Okay, let's consider another alternative, right? I've changed some values here. So now in world 3, we don't have the highest total anymore. We have a lower total than worlds 1 and 2. This person in world 3 has gotten worse. They're worse off by 10. They had 5 before. Now they're at -5. The question is, what world would Rawls choose now? Which policies? The policies that lead to world 1, the policies that lead to world 2, the policies that lead to world 3. Again, we're looking at primary social goods. We want to maximize the minimum. We want the person who's least well off to have the most social goods. And again, that's world 3. So even though this total is less than the one in worlds 1 and 2, the person who's the least well off is better off than the least well off person in worlds 1 and 2. So we're still going to go with world 3. Okay, things have gotten even worse in world 3, right? So now person 1 is at -15, the total is -1. Are we going to choose world 3? Rawls like, no, we're not choosing world 3 anymore because the person who's the least well off is worse than the least well off person 1 and 2. World 1, least well off person -7, that's better than -8. So now Rawls is going to choose world 1. All right, I've changed up some more numbers here. And what I want to do is kind of push back against Rawls' idea. Maybe the examples we've looked at so far are kind of intuitive. You're like, yeah, I would choose the policies in the relevant worlds. I would agree with Rawls. Now we're going to sort of think about how someone might object to Rawls. So one thing you might do is look at 3 worlds like this. So in world 1, we've got 10, 11, and 12 for a total of 33. In world 2, we have 9, 19, and 20 for a total of 48. In world 3, we have 8, 108, 109 for a total of 225. We say, okay, say you're behind the veil of ignorance. Which world are you going to choose? The world that produces outcomes like 1, the world that produces the policies that produce outcome like world 2, or the world that produce the policies that produce outcomes like world 3? Rawls seems to suggest that we should choose the policies that lead to the outcome in World 1. But I'm not so sure that we would. So if I was sort of behind the veil of ignorance and I was looking at my, possible lives in World 1, I'd say like, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be okay in those worlds. But look at World 2. I just have a little bit more risk. I could be a little bit worse off, but I could also be like way better off. I could be a 19 or 20. That's way better than 11 or 12. So maybe I should do World 2 over World 1. Or even to make it more extreme, right? You might think about World 3. Like, I could have 8 primary social goods. That's not that much worse than 10. But I could also like have 108 or 109. I could be super well off. Maybe I'm willing to take a risk in World 3 of having 8 in order to have the possibility or the option of having so much. This, so Rawls, right, is going to choose World 1, but the utilitarian, for example, is definitely going to choose World 3. That's better from the utilitarian perspective. And maybe, right, this example puts a little bit of pressure on Rawls' theory and says, maybe it's not quite right. Maybe utilitarianism is a better theory. Again, utilitarianism is going to face its own objections, as we'll see here in a second. But there are at least some cases where we might think, I'm not sure Rawls is right. Okay, final example. We've got another sort of mixed up distribution. World 1, 12, 10, and 9. World 2, 4, 22, and 13. World 3, 20, 8, and 8. So, where's Rawls going to be? Oh, the worst off person here is 9. The worst off is 4. The worst off here is 8. So Rawls is going to pick World 1. Right? That's the best one from his perspective. What about the utilitarian? What world is best from the utilitarian perspective? Well, that's World 2. We just look over here, the total, 39. So if we're a utilitarian, we're going for the policies in World 2. Now, the objection I want to talk about here is an objection from Robert Nozick, who's a libertarian, and he's going to sort of give us some additional information. So he says, imagine World 2, person 1 is enslaved 7 days a week. Now, we might think, yeah, that gets us some good results, but someone's enslaved, and there's a problem with that. So even though it gives us the most results, maybe person 2, right, is enslaving person 1, thinking like, you can't do that, person 2. So I see that you're like really benefiting from this, but we're not gonna, there's a problem. There's injustice in World 2, and so World 2 can't be the just world. But imagine, right, that, up in World 1, we still have a problem, right? Let's say person 1 is enslaved only 1 week per month. So not every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, whatever. Instead, person 1 is only enslaved 1 week per month by person 2 again. It looks like, that's better. Maybe we don't want someone enslaved all the time, but the fact that someone's enslaved is still a problem. Now, let's say in this last world, World 3, person 1 is not enslaved at all. In that case, it's true that this doesn't give us the highest total, and it's true that the people who are the least well off are not quite as well off as they would be in the other world. But hey, person 1 is not enslaved, and that's important. That's a crucial feature of justice. So Nozick's going to go in for World 3. Now, one thing before we move on, I think this is a little bit unfair to Rawls' theory. It sort of ignores the first principle of justice that he had, right? Sort of positions have to be open, equal and open to everyone. We can't have to have extensive liberties, right? They're equally extensive for everyone. We can't have like people enslaving each other. So I don't know that Rawls would really pick World 1, but it is a problem, at least with his difference principle, or at least sort of thinking like, if we just focus on the worlds where the least well off or as well off as possible, we might end up with like a world where people are enslaved, and that would be a problem. So it's a sort of note of caution if we're applying Rawls' theory. We can't sort of have enslavement or rules that would allow certain groups of people to be enslaved. But it does sort of point towards this kind of Nozick's view where like, hey, we sort of need to give people equal opportunities and let them use those opportunities they want. And if somebody gets way better off than other people, then we should be okay with that. So that's the last objection I'll talk about to Rawls' theory. We'll sort of leave it at that, and we'll see you later.